Good morning. I know this is a hard act to follow, but if you would take your seats, we will start with our next plenary session. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This plenary session and this morning, we're going to talk about food. This is a topic that is dear to all of us, to everyone, no matter how big or small you are as a country, no matter how rich or poor. And we've seen this quite incredibly in the last few years with the food price inflation that we've seen all over the world, whether you're living in Europe or in Africa or in Asia or in the Americas. This food price inflation has been fueling the cost of living crisis that so many have been facing. But for millions of people who live in low and middle income countries, this question of food and agriculture goes to the heart of how they can get out of hunger and poverty. It goes to the heart of the development question. And so it's more than just about food to eat. It's about food as a source of income or employment. It's about food as a source of security and livelihood. And that's why I'm very pleased to be here. My name is Carin, by the way. I'm an NGA for the COMESA Competition Commission, so thank you to COMESA for inviting me to be here. And this plenary, which we call Global Market Power in Food and Agricultural Markets, is really here to showcase some of the work of the ICN's Special Project on Food and Agriculture that is importantly co-chaired by Kenya and South Africa. And so thank you for inviting me to moderate this session. The plenary is going to look at food and agricultural value chains, which has been the subject of this ICN special project. And during this special project, what we've seen is that often the conduct in agricultural and food value chains has had this cross-border dimension. We heard about it in the morning session on cartels, and it raises a lot of questions for merger control. Our plenary really has two main purposes. The first is to hear how the competition agencies here with me today are both identifying and enforcing against anti-competitive arrangements in agricultural and food markets. And our speakers are going to share lessons from their market inquiries, studies, and cases. We're going to look at input markets, we're going to look at processes, and we're going to look at retail today. The issue of traders, also critically important, is going to be dealt with in a separate breakout session tomorrow when we will look at the Bunge-Viterra merger and the Sustain IT joint venture. So if you want to hear more about traders, it's in the breakout session tomorrow. The second purpose of our plenary is to charter a way forward for the ICN special project on food and agriculture so that we can keep helping competition agencies address these issues and cooperate better together. I mean, that's been a real theme this morning, both in the cartels working group and in the keynote speech we had today. Very important theme also on food and agriculture. So, before I hand over to our speakers, I just want to take 1 minute to recap what has actually emerged from the special project to date. So many of you took part in the survey, which really highlighted how important this issue is across the ICN membership. And it was deepened through ongoing sharing of experiences, cases, and inquiries. One of the common concerns that emerged was this challenge in tackling international concentration and cross-border markets, and how important it is to cooperate together to tackle these issues. There's been identifying the huge benefit to share methodologies on collecting information, how you get your data sources, and how we can share better research and analysis. There's also, linked to our second purpose for this plenary, the idea of where to now and how do we charter a way forward. And there are some ideas that have emerged that I hope will also come out in this plenary about working together on templates or tools for methodologies for price monitoring, building methodologies through deep dives into particular cases, and the issues around fertilizers, feed, poultry, and seeds has emerged quite a lot. An overarching paper on this broader issue of international concentration and cross-border issues. And then finally, pretty straightforward, having a knowledge base where all this information can be stored. One more slide from me and then I'm handing over. We have created a QR code that you can take a photo of now, which basically puts together all of the studies that you're going to hear spoken about today. So if you want more information about these market studies, we have a page that we've put together with all of our countries' studies on them. On that paper, you also have access to the African Markets Observatory, which is being run by the University of Johannesburg Center on Competition Regulation and Economic Development, and my organization, Shamba Center's Agri-Food Monopoly Tracker, which tries and looks at cases that are taken in Africa around agri-food markets. So now we turn to our panel. We want to hear more from you. Let's start with Mr. David Kemei, who's the Director General of the Competition Authority of Kenya, and he's also the co-chair of the special project. Mr. Kemei, Kenya's recently published an animal feed inquiry. Can you share with us what did you find in this inquiry, what did you learn, and what are you planning to do next?
Thank you very much, Carin, for the opportunity. Let me start by thanking Sarah and our team at CMA for this wonderful and amazing conference. The organization is superb. We are happy about it. Now to go to the question that she has asked me is that we found the following in our study. Again, she has given the background that this is a special project of ICN, which we took it up, and these are the following findings for this project. Number one is that we found that the prices were actually increasing, and therefore the results reflected structural issues in the animal feed sector, which is a critical input in livestock production in Kenya and in the rest of the world. The inquiry also assessed the entire value chain for key inputs like maize, soy meal, sunflower cake, to feed manufacturing and distribution, and several critical findings emerged as follows. Number one, we found that there are actually supra-competitive pricing of inputs. The price of key protein inputs was found to be significantly higher than would be expected under competitive market conditions. This is due in part to reliance on imports, where large international suppliers charge Kenyan farms more than other markets, and re-export excess supply to countries like India and China. This artificial scarcity raises costs and sidelines smaller feed producers. In addition to that, we found that we found some opaque input markets. The supply of inputs is dominated by brokers and intermediaries operating without transparency. Therefore, prices are often arbitrary, negotiated per delivery, not actually set in supply-demand fundamentals. The other finding is that we found seasonality and cross-border challenges. The supply of key inputs like maize is highly seasonal and heavily reliant on imports from Uganda and Tanzania, but non-tariff barriers, export restrictions, and inconsistent enforcement at borders actually drive up costs and increase the risk of contaminated feedstock. The other finding was disjointed domestic regulation, where we find the local taxes by our counties lead to double taxation in some cases as goods move across the counties. For instance, transporters with branded vehicles pay extra even after paying levies at the point of origin. These local fees inflate the costs of feed. Those are the main aspects that we found in that study. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would now like to move to Hungary, where you had very skyrocketing dairy prices in the post-COVID period, and you were really concerned about these and initiated this accelerated sector inquiry into the milk value chain. And if I understand correctly, you didn't just look at the processing level, but you looked at the entire value chain. So we have with us here today Mr. Csaba from the Hungarian Competition Authority. Can you tell us more about this experience? How did you find the information? What did you discover? And what are you planning to do about it?
Thank you, Carin. First of all, I would like to say thank you for Sarah and the ICN event teams for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you for the opportunity to share the insights from the Hungarian competition authorities, GVH, work on the dairy sector, particularly regarding cross-border issues across the value chain. In our dairy sector analysis, we thoroughly examined the entire supply chain from farms to processing firms all the way to retail. We found that cross-border issues are present at every level. At the farming stage, global input markets have a significant impact. Fertilizer prices, for instance, are heavily influenced by natural gas price movements worldwide. Similarly, the drought has pushed up the prices of animal feed globally. As you know, in 2020, in Carpathian Basin, there was a very serious drought. Moreover, within the European Union, raw materials such as milk can be easily transported. While this mitigates local production shortages, it also means that prices tend to correlate strongly across the EU countries, making local markets highly sensitive to external shocks. When it comes to processing and retailing, cross-border effects remain substantial. Many input materials, packaging, machinery, and additives are imported from countries like China or other developing or developed economies, despite the fact that the main raw materials, raw milk, is predominantly domestic. The import prices of the final products significantly influence domestic price negotiations. When imports became more difficult, for instance, during the COVID-19 pandemic or due to logistic disruptions, local manufacturers gained room to raise their prices and profitability. It also highlights the fact that reducing trade restrictions can lead to favorable effects on the domestic market. Nevertheless, it is not a coincidence that the new vision for EU agriculture and food published in 2025 ends with the imperative of strengthening food sovereignty and strategic autonomy. At this turbulent time, we cannot interpret any public policy issue without its geopolitical context. Member states of the EU, within the active engagement of their competition authorities, can formulate key recommendations at national level in order to contribute to the objective of food sovereignty, as is shown by our analysis. Its key conclusion is that even when the main inputs are locally sourced, international factors heavily impact pricing. No country, not even those self-sufficient in food production, can shield itself entirely from global price movements. Nevertheless, local factors still play a role and can lead to some deviation from global prices. For example, the elimination of the raw milk price forecast published by the Hungarian Dairy Board helped to stabilize domestic prices, showing that national measures can have a meaningful effect. These findings underline the importance of international cooperation projects like those of the ICN, which provide valuable platforms for sharing experience and good practices across the borders. Let me also briefly touch on the tools the GVH uses to monitor these dynamics from a competition perspective. We rely on a combination of databases to track developments across the entire supply chain. The competition statistic database provides us with a broad economic overview, while our price monitoring database, Price Spotter system, known locally as the Árfigyelő in Hungarian language, offers real-time insights into price movements. To complement these resources, we also use external sources such as market data, prices, volumes from the Institute of Agriculture Economics. Together, these tools help us better understand market developments, identifying competition concerns, and intervene when necessary, supporting both consumers and market stability and increase product market competition. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So we've heard two interesting cases in two very different contexts, but dealing with input and processing sectors, and feed in dairy, and in Kenya's case, feed also for poultry. I want to now move to the supermarkets, all the other way at the end of the chain, and hear from Ms. Gina Cass-Gottlieb, who's the chair of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. You've just published a supermarkets inquiry a few months ago, alongside a number of other food and agricultural inquiries that were published in earlier years on dairy, beef and wine. But let's focus on the supermarkets one. What did you find out about the supermarket sector? But more importantly, what lessons did you learn as an agency for collecting information about this segment? And what can you do about it? So we've heard a lot of what we found, some about the tools we were using, but again, what action are we able to take with this information that we're gathering?
Thanks very much, Carin. I also want to thank the CMA and the co-chairs of this special project, South Africa and Kenya, for allowing me to be able to share the experience of the ACCC here. So I want to start by giving you a quick sense of the value chain in Australia. So we have a relatively fragmented farmer community in terms of supply of agricultural products. We then have more concentration at the processing level, and in the past the ACCC has opposed mergers of processors, particularly in the dairy sector. We then have at the supermarket sector quite a highly concentrated level at retailing. So we have two very large, having 67% market share, called Coles and Woolworths. We have had the successful entry of Aldi, very fortunately, which provides at the hard discount level some real discounting in price and competition on price in home brand and their limited set of fresh and dairy. And importantly to note for all the enforcers here and who share an enforcement stance and posture, in part the ability of Aldi to expand across Australia was a result of what the ACCC had found in an earlier supermarkets inquiry in 2008, when the ACCC found that there were restrictive covenants in leases put there by the two largest players, Coles and Woolworths, which prevented Aldi being able to enter as a second supermarket in many of the desirable shopping centres in urban Australia. So after that enforcement investigation and a commitment, which meant that those covenants, restrictive covenants, could not be enforced and not be entered into in the future, Aldi expanded from 150 stores to 650 stores, which was a very important intervention to increase competition at the supermarket sector, but it is still not sufficiently significant because of the limited product set. And then there are independent supermarkets who are smaller, small business, can't compete largely on price because they acquire at a lower scale, but compete by differentiating their service and their convenience, and they are also generally the bigger proportion of supermarkets in rural and remote areas. What we then found was that because of this significant dominant position of the two largest retailers, that there was a material imbalance of bargaining power with our more fragmented suppliers. This resulted in the suppliers were required to give an absolute fixed commitment to supply at volume and price, but the two largest supermarkets, and Aldi actually behaved quite differently, interestingly, the two largest supermarkets would unilaterally change the volume depending upon their assessment, even week to week, the volume that they were purchasing and also the price, whereas Aldi did give commitments to its forecasts to the farm sector. The impact of that, particularly on farmers like fresh produce for dairy and beef, they have an export constraint, and so they are less subject to and less reliant upon the two largest supermarkets. But for fresh produce suppliers, we have had farmers leave the sector altogether because they cease to be able to receive any return to have a sustainable farm business when they have to invest and meet their commitments, but then they do not receive the revenue. What we found is a consumer sector. So for consumers, we have a combination of highly urbanised population. Most of our population, over 90%, will be in the urbanised fringe of Australia. But then there we have a diversity of higher income to lower income communities, and then we have regional and remote communities, some of which are extremely disadvantaged members of our community and of our population. We found at the consumer level that consumers were seriously affected by the increase in price. So price increased over the past 5 years, significant, that is food and grocery prices, significantly higher than the general CPI and then the wage price index. We used a consumer survey in order to get input from consumers, and the consumer survey told us at least 25% of the people responding feel stress entering a supermarket because they cannot afford what they need to buy, that they have shifted, and people will see Australia as a relatively wealthy in world terms country. But so we had 25% of our consumers telling us they were shifting to lower price goods, home brand goods, frozen vegetables and fruit rather than fresh, and that many parents in a family were skipping meals because actually they had reached a stage of challenge on their food security. So this is not something at those levels we were necessarily expecting, but it was something that came very loud and clear from consumers. The way we gathered the information was through submissions, through supplier roundtables, some of them conducted very confidentially because suppliers were fearful of retribution from the major retailers. We use the consumer survey and we use compulsory information and data collection powers. What do we want to do about this? So we've made recommendations in terms, so looking at the problem we found at the supplier imbalance of bargaining power. We have a food and grocery code so that the government has put in place to deal with supplier engagement, but it allows the supermarkets to negotiate out of it. And for many of the suppliers, in that circumstance, they agree that there would be a negotiation out. So we have recommended that there be mandatory minimum protections, including in relation to an inability to unilaterally change price or unilaterally change volume. We have also recommended that there is an obligation for there to be much more transparency and detail in the forecasting that is given by the supermarkets to suppliers, and in addition that there is much more transparency, which indeed the ALDI process had, in terms of the manner of weekly tendering to acquire and then pay for the products. At the consumer level, we recommended, in order to allow effective price comparison for consumers who need to really get value for their grocery spend, we recommended that each of the supermarkets needed to have online up-to-date dynamic prices. The two largest supermarkets need to provide an API with dynamic pricing to allow comparison websites to put up meaningful comparisons, but also that they need to remove the confusion that consumers are having so that pricing is on a unit price basis, price per gram, price per volume, so consumers can compare between the different products. And if there is a reduction in packaging, many of you I'm sure will see this, particularly if you're also a consumer protection agency, what's called shrinkflation, that if there is a reduction in size in packaging, which often still is at the same previous price, so a price increase, that there's a requirement to actually put up a ticket on the shelf that shows that there has been a reduction in size.
Thank you. So pretty alarming stories all across in how consumers are really being hit by these big food price increases, but also great to hear all the tools that are being put in place. Ms. Cass-Gottlieb, you've mentioned a number now around price monitoring and transparency, the food and grocery code. Let's move to Saudi Arabia, where I believe you have just released last week your first fresh fruit and vegetable market inquiry. Dr. Fahad Alshathri is the head of Saudi Arabia's General Authority for Competition. You mentioned to me when we spoke that this fruit and veg market inquiry revealed a number of cross-border issues as well because of how dependent you are on imports for your fruit and vegetables. What are the main findings from your report, and how are you planning to respond?
Thank you, Carin, and I would like also to take this opportunity to thank our host, the CMA, and the organizer, the ICN, for the excellent organization and hosting. I hope our story is less alarming than the three stories here, but let me start with explaining the structure of the agriculture sector in Saudi Arabia. As you know, natural conditions in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is not favorable for a wide production of agriculture products. Therefore, there is more reliance, as you mentioned, on the import products. Given just some figures that indicate the high reliance on the imports, 90% of our wheat demand are imported, as well as 72% of fruits and vegetables also imported. The dates in Saudi Arabia is the exception, where Saudi Arabia is the second largest supplier of dates globally. Also, there were many policies by the government that led recently to self-sufficiency in the raw milk and eggs, as well as reducing the dependence on the imports in the fresh fruits that decreased from 85% to 65% in 2022. Two important results to keep in mind from these figures. First, food security is and competition issues are less focused on the response to natural events and more focused on the structural aspects in relation to reliance on import, as I mentioned, and local production. And the second point, which is government support is needed for food security, but it's important from GAC perspective to balance that with competition. Therefore, GAC advocates for three issues with regard to fruits and vegetable markets. First, ensuring competitive neutrality between public and private suppliers. And second, fairness of competition between small and large businesses that supply fruits and vegetables. And finally, the third, which is policy coherence, balancing the different objectives with regard to competition. Moving to the results or the findings of the fruits and vegetable study, it shows that there were a steady growth in terms of the demand in recent years as a result of the growing population, reaching 7.1 billion US dollar in 2024 compared to only 6.1 billion US dollar in 2020. The market is fragmented in terms of large number of small players in the market, but if we go to the import side, it's more concentrated compared to the local production. The concentration is in the market, it's relatively concentrated. If we look at the HHI index, which is estimated at 3,760, the CR4 and the CR3 is around 72%, 70% respectively. With regard to the prices, and contrary to the cases that we listen to, prices are rising in line with inflation, not with any unexpected spikes. Usually, seasonally in Ramadan, there is some spikes in the prices, but it's not different from other countries in the region. Now, the regulators, there is 4 regulators in the market: Ministry of Environment, Water and Agriculture, Ministry of Municipality and Housing, and Saudi Food Drug Authority, and the Ministry of Commerce. Moving to the recommendations as a result of this study, and then I'll move to the cross-border issues. I think the primary recommendation that we came up with the study is the importance of enhancing coordination between the different regulators in the market to ensure competition issues are considered and there is efficient market entry and expansion. Also, there is a recommendation from GAC perspective to have more advocacy role focused on first analyzing the potential impact of regulations to ensure the competition considerations are incorporated, and second, to pursue a study on the informality and the impact of the informality in the public benefit marketplaces. And finally, support relevant authorities in designing least distortive support programs with transparent criteria. Finally, I move to the cross-border issues. As you know, and as I mentioned, reliance on imports with regards to agriculture emphasize the importance of engaging with different authorities, either in the region or globally, in order to ensure effective competition in the market. So that's why GAC is considering the scope of increasing cooperation with foreign competition authorities in two aspects. The first one, as a leading, we're taking a leading role in the Arab competition network, and we engage with our members in order to benefit from best practices in multilateral organization, in order to find solutions for all the challenges that we are facing, including in the fruits and vegetable market. We have under ACN 4 working groups: merger and control, competition law enforcement, institutional efficiency, and policy advocacy groups. And we conducted more than 22 workshops, in addition to launching three competition awards in order to encourage research and development. And we will, since we published our study, we will have a workshop in order to explain the results of the study for our members.
Great, thank you. So before we move to the way forward, I briefly want to ask two people from the floor to come and share their perspectives. These are the Malaysia Competition Commission and the COMESA Competition Commission, both who've been very, very active in the ICN Special Project. So if I can start with Ms. Nabiha Mustafa from the Malaysian Competition Commission. You have a very interesting example, because here we've heard a lot of the market studies and inquiries and what's come out. You actually have a case of enforcement against, if I remember correctly, a feed cartel that you identified. Could you share just for 2 minutes briefly the experience you have and what you think we should be doing with the special project?
Thank you. So we actually conducted a market review, as Kenya is doing, on poultry feed back in 2014. Then we didn't know that we would use the information that we have obtained for our investigation that started in early 2022. So in late 2021, we noticed a spike of poultry feed prices in the market that also led consequently to the fresh chicken price in the market. And upon market monitoring, we noticed the market behavior is not as it's supposed to be. Then we started our investigations. We found 5 large enterprises involved in cartel in fixing the quantum of poultry feed prices. And these 5 enterprises have large presence not only in Malaysia, but also across the globe. But although we didn't take into considerations like how the impact outside of Malaysia, but I thought it would be good to also share that information. So in terms of what we can do in ICN, we think that it would be best if we have a sort of a database that what other authorities have done in agriculture sectors, because for instance, at the moment, my team is also looking at fish and vegetables. So instead of starting from scratch, it would be good to have something to refer to and also start conversations with other authorities if they have cases that related to agriculture sectors, and we can go back to the data that we have and see whether perhaps similar conduct is also happening in Malaysian market. Yep.
Great, thank you. So a strong call for a database and an excellent example of enforcement against a cartel. Dr. Willard Mwemba, who's the head of the COMESA Competition Commission. COMESA has been doing a lot of studies looking at problems in fertilizer, feed, poultry, vegetable oil markets. What are the cross-border issues that you're dealing with as a regional authority, and what can you do about it? Please join us on the microphone. 2 minutes, please.
1 minute was spent in walking, so 3 minutes. So thank you so very much for all the contributors here. Wonderful remarks, wonderful and insightful experiences. Thank you to South Africa and Kenya for being on the steering committee. Look, the issues of food are very important, and they cut across all territories, all geographic spaces, whether you're in the global south, whether you're in the global north, wherever you are, food is very important. So I think it's, in my view, it's the single most impactful project that would affect the entire planet if we all consolidated and galvanized our efforts into that. So that is the first thing that I'll say. Coming to your question, I think David has put it very, 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 very clearly from our side, what we have observed. Number one is that there are terrible government policies. I hope I'll not be fired when I go back home. But there are terrible government policies sometimes that are implemented inadvertently, or not knowing that they would have certain anti-competitive effects on the market. So this is what we've discovered from our research. This is what we are advocating for. We've been meeting different government players to try to change those policies. For example, import and export bans in Southern and East Africa, causing lots of problems for Kenya. Some of the small producers in the value chain, like in the poultry sector, even had to close as a result of those bans and skyrocketing feed prices in Kenya. Due to lack of import competition from Southern Africa, for example, that was having a bumper harvest for inputs that would be used to produce feed in Kenya. And then, obviously, I have a lot to say, so I'll be parroting here and there. Coming to the actual ICN special project, I would love to thank the volunteer countries, Hungary, Kenya, South Africa, Malaysia, Philippines, Brazil. Those that are forgotten, it's not intentional. We've demonstrated from what we've been doing the last 1 year since Brazil last year as a pilot project that if we come together, in fact, we can work together. From the experiences that we've shared, the research studies that have come from different countries, my call now would be to ensure that we move in the direction where we come up with deliverables. I think Malaysia said something like that. I would be looking for a toolkit. Someone, I think from the European Union earlier said, is it, or the moderator said, we may come together to identify problems, but we may have different approaches to those problems. So we may have all these problems in our different jurisdictions, our different countries, but maybe the time and approach to those issues may be different. What would assist us is to come up with some kind of toolkit within these countries that have volunteered, and obviously calling for more countries. Something that started as an African project under AMO, Africa Market Observatory. Carin, you've been involved, and Simon Roberts from the Center for Competition Regulation and Economic Development has actually gone out of that space and become almost a global issue now. So we are calling for more to join, and then the ICN itself, I think our clarion call to you is to make this project more of a structured project. I would love to see, to come to a point in time where I would see a proper working group on this ICN special project, because as I've said, it impacts all of us. So we will continue collaborating, we'll continue doing that. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Okay, we are almost out of time, but this is the second part of our plenary with a few minutes left. What is the way forward? We've heard lots of ideas from you now, from COMESA and Malaysia. COMESA even proposing an ICN working group on food and agriculture, but more specifically this focus on a database, on toolkits. Can we hear from our speakers on what you think would be helpful in an ICN context to move forward to assist you in working on these issues? Let's start with Mr. Kemei from Kenya. It's working, it's on. Yeah, you don't have to turn it on.
Right. Thank you, Carin. The way forward. For us, I think boosting knowledge database or information database for all of us to link into for easier decision making would be ideal. So if we could actually invest in data and research, which is very critical, it would be very ideal to go that direction. Number two, we've talked about so many cross-border challenges and issues. I think we need to up our game in collaboration and cooperation so that we can tackle these cross-border issues if all are reading from the same script. I think lastly for us is that if we can review and advocate for pro-competitive policies and regulations in our different jurisdictions and under the umbrella of ICN, then it will be possible to tackle any complex challenges that we may have, not only in the food and market industry, but in all industries. Thank you very much.
Excellent, great ideas. I'll just pass on to Saudi Arabia now.
Thank you, Carin. I think, having best practices is important for future work of each jurisdiction. Therefore, I would suggest that basing the future work of this project or any other project on best practices that we develop based on experiences either from emerging developing markets or advanced markets. That's the first thing. Second, I think engagement at the beginning of the market studies with other jurisdictions is important in order to learn lessons in terms of scoping the studies and also learning how to conduct these studies and develop the recommendations going forward is very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Hungary.
I believe we should move towards creating and sharing short case studies that illustrate practical experience, challenges, and the ways other authorities tackle them. Alongside that, publishing toolkits and methodological recommendations would be very valuable. These would provide concrete guidance for authorities facing similar issues and would have built a more coherent and practical body of knowledge within the ICN community. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And last but not least, Australia.
Thank you. I strongly support the database suggestion from Malaysia to assist in each of us in a cooperative sense, but two elements that I would like to see in it, and the first in relation to data is looking at the sources of data and then the methodologies applied by our data teams in order to analyse and determine the levels, for example, of competition, concentration and margin at the different levels of the value chain. And the second, picking up in a sense the short case study concept, we have global players here. The traders manifestly also in a number of cases processes. And if in the description in effect of the case there can be a very brief description of the conduct that is seen, particularly if there are restrictive practices that have been seen, it is likely global players will, in a sense, apply similar strategies across the world. And so noting either restrictive conditions, a pattern of serial acquisitions or creeping acquisitions, it will help alert each of us to the sort of points that we should be watching out for.
Great, thank you so much. There are some very concrete ideas that have come out of this session. I think your last presentations were very clear. I think there's pretty much agreement here on a database, and I think thank you to Ms. Cass-Gottlieb for being a bit more specific about what we want to see in this database. The sources of data, the methods for how information is being collected, so that that can help inform some of the cross-border issues and challenges that authorities are facing. There's been a strong message around toolkits, best practices, case studies, all also contributing to this methodological challenge, but again, helping countries to see how others are doing it and to see how players in their own market might be acting in other markets. And then lastly, we have this call around policy that's come out quite a lot, and making sure that we don't forget this policy advocacy piece and how you deal with when it's the policies that are driving the concentration or the anti-competitive conduct. Thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you to the ICN and to the CMA.